Imagine you are a boy of 12 years old, living in a small village in Bulgaria in 1550. The morning fog clings tightly to the valley like a soft veil as you assist your father in tending to the flock of sheep. The bells hanging from their necks produce a gentle tune that has been the familiar backdrop of your entire life. Your mother is busy preparing breakfast, warm bread and fresh goat's milk that carries the flavor of home, of safety, and everything you have ever known. Suddenly you hear it, the thunderous pounding of hooves on the cobblestone streets. Your father's face turns as pale as parchment, and your mother drops the clay portrait she was holding. It shatters on the floor just like your world is about to break apart. Every person in your village understands the meaning of those hooves. The collectors of the Sultan have arrived. You hide behind a wooden cart and watch as the Ottoman officials dismount their horses. Their silk robes remain spotless despite the long journey, and they carry scrolls and lists. Their eyes scan the crowd of villagers with the sharp coldness of merchants appraising livestock. Then one of them points straight at you. Your mother falls to her knees, pleading in a tongue they refuse to acknowledge. Your father remains silent, fully aware that resistance would bring death upon the whole family. You are seized with promises that you will serve the Sultan, that you will achieve greatness, that this is a proud honor. But as the cart moves away from all that you have ever called home, all you can hear is the sound of your mother's sobs, slowly fading into the distance. Far away, you will never see her again. This marked the start of your new life as a palace servant, a goom within the mightiest empire on earth. The terrors that awaited you beyond the palace gates would soon make you yearn for the peaceful days spent watching sheep graze in the foggy valleys of your homeland. Now, as you delve into these forgotten tales of endurance and hardship, if you enjoy uncovering the concealed realities of history, consider pressing the like button and subscribing for more stories like this. Also, please leave a comment below sharing where you are listening from. It astonishes me that we are uncovering these ancient narratives together, coming from various corners of the globe, united across both time and place by our mutual fascination with the past. The journey to Istanbul was your first encounter with the harsh brutality that would come to shape your new life. You and many other boys were forced to march for several weeks over rough lands, poorly nourished, spending nights outdoors or in makeshift shelters that barely shielded you from the weather. Those who were weak, unable to keep pace, who fell sick or who lost hope, were abandoned to perish. This was your initial understanding of life within the Ottoman palace even before you arrived at the capital. Vulnerability meant death, and survival depended on being the strongest, the most intelligent, or the most adaptable. The boy walking next to you, probably about 14 years old, had been taken from a Greek fishing village. His name was Nick, though he whispered to you that soon that name would be banned. He attempted to flee on the third night of the march, but the guards caught him before he could reach even 1 mile. They dragged him back to the camp and punished him in front of all the other boys as a warning. His cries echoed throughout the fields, and you shut your eyes tightly, trying to drown out the sound, yet you could not silence the message. Escape was hopeless, and resistance useless. By the time you arrived at the edges of Istanbul, you had learned to move like a shadow, to speak only when spoken to vanish when the guard's gaze became threatening. You had seen boys vanish during the dark hours. Some tried to run away, others simply could not survive another day. Their empty places in the line reminded you constantly of your own fragility. The first sight of Istanbul's skyline should have filled you with awe. The minarets reaching for the sky, the enormous dome of Hagia Sophia, the vast palace complex destined to become your prison. Yet all you felt was a deep dread tightening in your stomach like a heavy stone. This grand city symbolized everything you had lost and everything you feared you might become. Upon arriving in Istanbul, you encountered your first selection. Ottoman officials separated the remaining boys into groups according to their supposed potential. The method was degrading and meticulous. They inspected your teeth as if you were a horse, tested your reflexes, and made you perform various tasks. You were asked to recite the little you had learned about letters and numbers. Then your height was measured. Your skin was inspected for imperfections, and your facial features were assessed with the detached precision of art critics. Those who were the most beautiful and intelligent were destined for the palace academy called the Enderun School, while others were to join the Janissaries, an elite military unit. However, for those selected to serve within the palace, an entirely different challenge awaited. One that would test not only the limits of your physical endurance, but also your spirit's capacity to endure systematic dehumanization. You were among the lucky few chosen for the Enderun School, located within the walls of Topkapi Palace. The officials responsible for your selection examined your clear skin, your bright eyes, and obvious intelligence with smiles that seemed kind but were actually the expressions of predators who had spotted particularly promising prey. The Enderun School is often described as the world's earliest example of formalized education for the gifted. While this may be true on the surface, it disguises a much darker truth about what education really meant for boys like you who had been taken from their homes. Yes, you would be taught languages such as Arabic, Persian, and Turkish. You would study mathematics, astronomy, literature, and law. Your training would include music, calligraphy, and various skilled crafts. Yet this education demanded a price that went far beyond academic discipline. The palace complex, which soon became your entire world, was a labyrinth of marble passages, richly decorated rooms, and secret spaces. Spaces where danger seemed to await around each turn were your constant reality. The dormitories inside the palace complex isolated you entirely from the outside world, enclosed by numerous walls, guards, and strict regulations that made any attempt to flee not just hard, but unimaginable. The room where you would rest resembled a marble tomb, lined with narrow beds draped in silk that felt more like shackles against your skin. On your first night in the dormitory, you lay awake absorbing the sounds that would come to define your captivity. The quiet sobs of boys missing home, muffled by their pillows, hushed conversations in unfamiliar languages, and the footsteps of older students and supervisors patrolling the corridors after lights out. You gripped tightly the small wooden cross your mother had pressed into your hand when you were taken away. But by dawn, that final link to your past was discovered and taken from you. You were assigned a new name, Mesmet, and instructed to erase your Christian background. Conversion to the Empire's state religion was mandatory. It formed the very foundation of your transformation from a captured child into an Ottoman servant. The ceremony was held with great ceremony, as though you had willingly decided to follow this path. Yet you and everyone else understood that no choice was involved. You repeated the phrases they made you say, but deep inside, you clung to the memory of your mother's lullabies and the image of your father. The most disturbing part of your education was the deliberate dismantling of your personal will and its rebuilding as a tool for imperial domination and control. The palace operated through a complicated social order where progress depended not only on scholastic success but also on your capacity to satisfy those in power. Pleasing others took many forms, some of which no child should ever be forced to understand. Your initial introduction to the palace's silent rules came from Amit, an older student who had been trapped in the system for 3 years. One evening in the dormitory, he approached you, his voice mixing threat with an unspoken offer. "You are new," he said, sitting on the edge of your bed without permission. "You do not know how things work here yet, but I can shield you, teach you, and help you earn favor. The teachers trust me and follow my advice about the younger boys." He placed his hand on your shoulder, and you felt frozen. At 12 years old, you had never been touched by a stranger, yet something about his presence made your skin crawl. He leaned in and whispered, "You will need to show your appreciation. There are special ways boys like you can thank older students for their protection, secret ways that remain between us. You confronted an impossible decision that countless boys before you had faced. Reject and endure cruel punishment, social exclusion, and the loss of all hope for progress, or comply and give up the last fragments of your autonomy. Childhood innocence was transformed into a system where your body became a commodity exchanged for favor and protection. There was no real option, only the need to survive. The palace's sexual environment was intricate and exploitative, functioning under rules shaped by many generations of abuse. Eunuchs who had been castrated as children and often carried their own deep psychological wounds held significant authority and used it to take advantage of the endless flow of newcomers. They knew the system deeply because they had been its victims before, but instead of shielding new arrivals, many turned into its most eager enforcers. Older students preyed on younger ones, continuing cycles of mistreatment that reached back through the ages. It was a perverse kind of initiation in which those accepted secured their rank by tormenting those beneath them. Palace officials abused their roles to gain unrestricted access to the most attractive boys, confident their victims had nowhere to turn for justice. The particularly cruel aspect of this structure was its fusion with the palace's official order. Sexual relations were not secret scandals. They were embedded in the social code, so thoroughly woven into everyday life that they appeared normal and unavoidable. Boys who attracted the attention of influential patrons saw their careers advance, their studies become lighter, and their daily existence improve, while those who declined or resisted faced hardship and isolation. Those who displeased their superiors were demoted to lowly roles, faced harsher punishments, or simply vanished from palace duties entirely. The psychological toll on boys like you was immense and deliberately engineered. Separated from your loved ones, stripped of your former identity, and thrust into an environment where your body was treated as a commodity, you developed what today might be identified as complex trauma reactions. Some boys turned cunning and shrewd, learning to wield their sexuality as a means to climb the ranks and survive. Others withdrew completely, becoming empty shells who went through the motions of palace life while their inner selves withered away. You witnessed both outcomes among those around you. Dmitri, taken from the same place as yourself, adapted to the system. Within 6 months he had new clothing, better meals, and a private tutor to teach him the language. Yet his eyes lost all expression, and he ceased speaking of home or family. When new boys arrived, he regarded them with the same cold calculation once directed at him by the officials. Stephanos, a Greek boy and son of a fisherman, chose the opposite course. He rejected all advances, endured beatings and punishments, and slowly faded into a ghost-like shadow. He fulfilled his duties automatically, studied without zeal, and seemed to disappear more each day. One morning his bed was vacant, and no one ever brought up his name again. You attempted to find a balanced path, accepting certain advances to survive while preserving a part of yourself that stayed unspoiled. However, the palace was built to make such compromises unattainable. Each day presented new challenges and decisions between humiliation and ruin, new methods through which the system aimed to reshape you according to its own design. European visitors to the Ottoman court occasionally caught glimpses of this secret world, though their reports were often colored by their own cultural prejudices and limited insight. A Venetian ambassador from the 16th century remarked on the palace officials' strong preference for their young male attendants. He described unsettling scenes, noting boys as young as 10 or 11 dressed in silk and adorned with jewels serving older men with a closeness that hinted at relationships going well beyond suitable master-servant roles. In the 17th century, a French diplomat was even more direct about what he observed at a palace reception. Young pages moved through the corridors like stunning birds trapped in cages, their eyes lowered while their bodies were made for show. It was impossible not to notice how possessively certain officials treated these children, or the terror that flashed in the boys' eyes whenever their masters approached. The harsh realities of life within the palace only intensified these circumstances. Psychological mistreatment was employed in a manner intended to dismantle any resistance and foster reliance. You resided in tight dormitories offering very little privacy, where every instant was under constant observation and regulation. Your day began before sunrise with prayers you were compelled to memorize. Meals were sufficient, yet never plentiful, served at exact times, and your daily routine was strictly regimented, leaving no chance for contemplation or defiance. Punishments were frequent and cleverly crafted to degrade and weaken morale. Boys who broke rules by speaking their native tongue, practicing traditional customs, or showing a lack of eagerness for their new existence suffered beatings, public shaming, or solitary confinement in quarters barely spacious enough to lie down. You saw a boy named Milos who had been discovered praying according to his old religion. He was forced to stand unclothed in the courtyard all day as fellow students were urged to ridicule him. The message was unmistakable. Your former identity was not merely forbidden but a source of disgrace. The palace's internal system of rewards further complicated your predicament and added more levels of exploitation. You could gain minor privileges by demonstrating good conduct, achieving academically, or currying favor with your superiors through various means. These perks, better meals, finer clothing, improved sleeping conditions, or access to books and musical instruments, became highly valued treasures in your confined existence. The entire system devised a tangled network of obligations and loyalties made resisting almost unthinkable, leaving cooperation as the sole option for survival. You learned to maneuver this environment with the shrewdness of someone far beyond your years. Offering assistance to older students with their homework earned you protection from their unwanted advances. Demonstrating exceptional skill in specific subjects drew the attention of teachers who could act as shields against the harshest mistreatment. You understood that flawless compliance and outward eagerness for your new existence could grant you small privileges that felt immense in your limited world. Some boys tried to run away, but the palace's position on a peninsula surrounded by water made escaping nearly impossible. Those captured faced brutal penalties that were deliberately displayed to discourage others. You saw a boy return who had attempted to swim across the Golden Horn to escape. He was barely alive when they hauled him back. The beating he endured in front of all the students left him permanently disabled. He existed as a warning to everyone else, shattered and barely able to function, a living proof of the fate awaiting those who chose defiance instead of submission. The handful who succeeded in fleeing confronted an even greater obstacle. Having lived in the palace for such a long time, their original identities were erased to such an extent that returning to their previous lives became impossible. It seemed impossible that their families might fail to recognize them, and their communities might turn away from them as traitors or converts. They had very few abilities that could help them survive beyond the palace system. Most who managed to escape were caught again within a matter of days. Even those who stayed free frequently found themselves lost in a world where they no longer belonged. As you grew up within the system, relying on cleverness, flexibility, and carefully planned submission to survive, new obstacles appeared along with a deeper corrosion of your spirit. The most accomplished students might eventually earn prestigious government roles, but this success required supporting the very system that had once harmed them. You came to a dreadful realization that your instructors and supervisors, the men who had both shaped and scarred you, had once been boys like yourself, taken away from their families and transformed into tools of imperial rule. This discovery forced a cruel decision. You could defy the system and probably be crushed by it, or fully accept it and become one of its enforcers. This meant choosing the next group of boys, breaking them down, reshaping them, and upholding the palace's power structures and exploitation. Many boys went down the second path, finding it simpler to become predators than to remain victims forever. The ceremony called Chikma marked the completion of your palace education and your transition into adulthood. After enduring years of intentional mistreatment disguised as education within the imperial service, you appeared as a young man fluent in several languages, proficient in administration and diplomacy, and trained in various arts and sciences. However, you also came out as someone whose spirit had been deeply damaged, whose comprehension of power became inseparably linked to exploitation, and whose ability to form regular human connections was harmed in ways that might never recover. For many who completed this experience, the change meant merely shifting from one kind of exploitation to another. Those assigned to administrative roles entered a realm where sexual favors and political promotion remained closely connected, and the teachings received in the palace about authority, submission, and survival continued to influence their adult years. Individuals placed in military positions carried the emotional wounds of their time in the palace, frequently turning into either ruthless agents enforcing imperial commands or shattered men struggling to discover meaning in lives constructed on abuse. The attitude of the Ottoman elites toward these customs was complicated and deliberately formulated to uphold the system while denying its darkest realities. Although official rules forbade multiple types of mistreatment, palace authorities often ignored behaviors that benefited their goals. This system succeeded in producing competent officials and faithful servants, which was its main objective. Yet, the human suffering it caused remained a harsh and enduring consequence. The system was once regarded as irrelevant to the empire's success, and any criticism was brushed off as a lack of understanding of its advanced methods for education and career advancement. Some writers from the Ottoman era occasionally recognized the harsher realities within the system while still defending its overall merit. A historian from the court in the 16th century noted, "It is true that the palace school demands significant sacrifices from its pupils, and not all who enter emerge unchanged. But from this forge of discipline and learning come the empire's finest servants, men whose loyalty has been tested and whose skills have been meticulously refined." Such language of transformation and growth concealed the harsh truths faced by boys like you. The testing you underwent included systematic sexual abuse. Your discipline meant erasing your former self and rebuilding a new identity created to fulfill imperial goals. Your education came at the expense of your childhood innocence and the ability to form typical human bonds. What makes this Ottoman palace system particularly troubling is how it blended genuine educational opportunities with organized abuse, making it difficult to separate the advantages from the suffering. The boys did receive an education which was, for the era, remarkably sophisticated. You learned to read and write in languages that opened possibilities across the known world. You studied sciences and mathematics that were the cutting edge of. The mistake you made brought you valuable abilities in diplomacy, administration, and military tactics that would benefit you throughout your lifetime. However, this education could not be separated from your exploitation and mistreatment. The very instructors who broadened your intellect also harmed you physically. The same system that offered opportunities simultaneously destroyed your innocence. The institution that guaranteed progress also made certain that the advancement was forever stained by the methods employed to reach it. This system reveals the intricate connection among power, sexuality, and violence in pre-modern societies. The Ottomans were not alone in exploiting youth. Similar customs appeared in various forms throughout ancient and medieval civilizations. What set the Ottoman system apart was its magnitude, its methodical nature, and its integration into the imperial framework. It was not a hidden wrongdoing, but rather an openly accepted institution praised for its efficiency and protected by those who benefited from it. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the palace system started to weaken as innovations in military technology reduced the significance of the Janissary forces. Additionally, emerging administrative methods lessened dependence on palace-trained officials. European influence and shifting societal values also played a role in the gradual evolution of the system. Yet, for the thousands of boys who entered the palace during the system's peak, these changes arrived far too late. Their accounts of a lost childhood marked by shattered innocence and broken spirits in service to imperial authority stands as one of history's most organized episodes of institutional child maltreatment. The boys who endured learned to maneuver through a reality where their appearance was both a gift and a curse, where their intellect was appreciated, but their humanity was disregarded, and where success demanded giving up fragments of their souls forever beyond retrieval. Some rose to influential ranks, becoming viziers, generals, and governors who influenced the empire's future. Yet they carried the wounds from their palace days, and many continued the cycles of abuse that molded them. Others vanished into obscurity, their destinies unknown and sorrows unspoken, with only administrative records bearing witness to their arrival, training, and final deployment. The palace walls that once echoed with the footsteps of these boys still exist today, now transformed into a museum wherein visitors admire the architectural splendor and artistic wonders of the Ottoman court. Tourists are captivated by the elegant rooms where the empire's elite received their education, but they perceive solely the outer beauty of these spaces. The marble halls conceal their darkest histories, and the chambers where learning and exploitation merged remain silent about the cost paid by countless young boys for the empire's glory. The guided tours recount the palace's story without revealing the hidden suffering endured behind its grand facade. The school's educational advancements played a significant role in preparing skilled administrators and contributing to the empire's achievements. However, the accounts rarely acknowledge the systematic mistreatment that was essential to its functioning. Boys who chose death over compliance with its harsh requirements, as well as the men who left its halls forever altered by their experiences, reveal a much darker side. As I conclude this narrative and envision your story as one among countless similar ones, I am reminded that these accounts of pain and endurance are not just historical notes. They depict real individuals, children forcibly separated from their families, stripped of their identities, and thrust into a world that valued their physical and mental capabilities, while disregarding their humanity as unimportant to the empire's grand ambitions. You, the boy I have pictured standing in those marble corridors with fear deep inside and silence across your lips, embody thousands of genuine children whose names are lost forever, whose unique stories remain unrecorded, whose pain went unrecognized by the very system that created and maintained it. Your spirit and the spirits of all boys like you continue to wander those palace halls, reminding us that beneath every empire's splendor lies a foundation constructed through human suffering, and that the price of power is frequently paid by those without any say. The horror was not just in the cruelty itself, but in how methodically it was enforced, how completely it became accepted, and how thoroughly it was ingrained. Forgotten by history, you and boys like you lived and died within a system that regarded you as mere beautiful objects to be shaped and exploited. Your stories deserve to be remembered not as distant historical curiosities, but as powerful testimonies to human endurance in the face of institutionalized cruelty. The morning air that once echoed with your frightened footsteps has long vanished, yet your story still resonates through time, calling upon us to witness your suffering and recall the dreadful cost of the empire's so-called Golden Age. By preserving your memory, we honor not only your personal struggle, but also the pain endured by countless children ensnared in the gears of power throughout history, used and discarded by systems that prioritized conquest over kindness, empire over innocence.